The mess hall at Camp Pendleton buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Trays clattered, boots scraped against linoleum floors, and hundreds of voices mixed together in a constant hum. It was 6:30 hours, and the Marines were grabbing breakfast before another day of drills and training exercises. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen stood in line with her tray, wearing plain fatigues with no rank insignia visible. She had just arrived at the base the night before, transferred from a classified assignment overseas. Her orders were clear: keep a low profile for the first 48 hours, while the base commander prepared for her official introduction. Sarah was about to take command of the entire training division, but for now, she was just another face in the crowd. She had chosen to eat with the enlisted personnel rather than the officers. It was something she always did when arriving at a new posting. She wanted to see how things really worked, how the junior Marines were treated, what the atmosphere was like when the brass wasn't watching. The line moved slowly. Sarah waited patiently, lost in thought about the challenges ahead. At 42 years old, she had 20 years of service behind her. She had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and several other places she couldn't talk about. Her record was decorated with commendations and medals, but more importantly, she had earned the respect of every soldier who had ever served under her command. "Move it, lady," a sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Sarah looked up. A young Marine, maybe 23 or 24, stood behind her. His name tape read Kruger. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the cocky expression of someone who had been at the base long enough to feel comfortable, but not long enough to have learned real humility. "The line's moving," Sarah said calmly, gesturing ahead. There was still a person in front of her getting their food. "I said move," Kruger repeated, louder this time. Several nearby Marines turned to look. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "I'll move when there's space to move into." Kruger's face flushed red. His buddies at a nearby table started snickering. "Listen here," he said, stepping closer. "I don't know what they taught you wherever you came from, but here we move with purpose. We don't stand around like we're shopping at the grocery store." Sarah could smell the ego on him. She had met 1,000 guys like Kruger in her career. They were usually good Marines underneath, but they hadn't been tested yet, hadn't learned that real strength came from discipline, not dominance. "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "I'm moving as fast as the line allows." "That's your problem," Kruger said. "Always an excuse." Before Sarah could respond, Kruger placed his hand on her shoulder and shoved her forward. Hard. Sarah stumbled, catching herself on the metal railing. Her tray clattered to the floor, sending silverware scattering across the tile. The mess hall didn't go completely silent, but a noticeable hush spread through the immediate area. Dozens of eyes turned toward the scene. Sarah straightened slowly. She could feel her heart pounding, not from fear or embarrassment, but from the effort it took to control her response. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to put this young Marine in his place right now. But her orders were clear. Low profile. She bent down to pick up her tray. "Yeah, that's right," Kruger said, loud enough for his friends to hear. "Pick up your mess." His buddies laughed. One of them called out, "Kruger, man, go easy on her." "I am going easy," Kruger shot back. "If she can't handle the mess hall, how's she gonna handle anything else?" Sarah collected her silverware without a word. The Marines around her seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or look away. She noticed a few uncomfortable faces in the crowd. Some of the more senior enlisted personnel looked troubled, but no one said anything. As Sarah stood up with her tray, Kruger smirked at her. "Welcome to Pendleton," he said. "Maybe think about transferring to the Air Force if you want things easier." His friends erupted in laughter. Sarah met his eyes for just a moment. She saw everything she needed to see: pride, youth, and a complete lack of understanding about who he had just put his hands on. She said nothing. She simply stepped back into line, got her breakfast, and walked to an empty table in the corner. But as she sat down, she noticed someone else had witnessed the entire exchange. A grizzled master sergeant stood near the coffee station, his eyes wide with recognition. He had seen Sarah's face before, probably in briefings or official communications. The master sergeant's expression shifted from shock to something that looked almost like anticipation. He knew. And judging by the way he glanced between Sarah and Kruger, he knew that Kruger had just made the biggest mistake of his military career. Sarah ate her breakfast in silence, watching, listening, and learning everything she needed to know about how this base really operated. Part 2. The Commander's Secret. Sarah spent the rest of that first day observing. She walked the base grounds, watching training exercises from a distance. She listened to conversations in the barracks hallways. She sat in on a few briefings where no one questioned her presence because she kept to the back of the room and said nothing. What she saw troubled her deeply. The base had fallen into a pattern that she recognized from other troubled postings. The leadership had grown distant from the enlisted ranks. The officers held their meetings in comfortable conference rooms while problems festered below. There was a culture of intimidation among some of the mid-level Marines, the ones like Kruger who had been around long enough to feel powerful, but not long enough to understand what real leadership meant. She saw junior Marines being hazed. She heard disparaging comments about women in the service. She watched as a female corporal was talked over in a planning session, her ideas ignored until a male Marine said the exact same thing 5 minutes later and received praise. That evening, Sarah was summoned to Base Commander Colonel Robert Hayes's office. It was a spacious room on the top floor of the headquarters building, with windows overlooking the training fields. Hayes was a career officer, 56 years old, with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen," Hayes said, standing to shake her hand. "Welcome to Camp Pendleton. Please, sit." Sarah sat in one of the leather chairs across from his desk. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to serve here." Hayes studied her for a moment. "I read your file. Very impressive. Your performance in Fallujah was exceptional, and your work with joint task forces in East Africa. Well, most of that's above my clearance level, but what I could read was remarkable. I was fortunate to serve with outstanding Marines, sir." "That's what they all say about you," Hayes replied. He leaned back in his chair. "Which is why you're here. Sarah, may I call you Sarah while we're speaking privately?" "Of course, sir." "Sarah, I'm going to be frank with you. This base has problems. Nothing that makes the news, nothing that shows up in the official reports, but problems nonetheless. Morale is lower than it should be. We've had 3 harassment complaints in the past 6 months. Retention numbers are down, and some of our mid-level NCOs have gotten too comfortable." Sarah nodded. "I noticed some concerning patterns today, sir." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "You've been here less than 24 hours. Respectfully, sir, some things are obvious if you know where to look." "Like what?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "There's a disconnect between leadership and the enlisted ranks. Some of the junior Marines have learned to keep their heads down rather than speak up, and there seems to be a tolerance for behavior that shouldn't be tolerated." Hayes sighed heavily. "You're not wrong. My previous training division commander was old school, good Marine, but he believed in a hands-off approach. Let the NCOs handle their own people, don't micromanage. The problem is, some of those NCOs started building their own little kingdoms. And now you want me to clean it up." "Exactly." Hayes leaned forward. "But here's the thing, Sarah. You can't come in like a hurricane. These are proud Marines. If you storm in on day 1 and start tearing apart everything they've built, they'll resist. They'll close ranks. You'll get compliance, but not buy-in." Sarah understood. "You want me to see how things operate first, earn their respect before I start making changes. That's why I asked you to keep a low profile for a couple days. Walk around. Listen. Let them see you as a Marine first, not as a rank." Hayes paused. "I heard something happened in the mess hall this morning." Sarah's expression didn't change. A minor incident, sir. A young Marine was impatient with the breakfast line. Master Sergeant Rodriguez told me it was more than that. He said Private First Class Kruger physically pushed you. It wasn't significant. Hayes studied her carefully. You know, most officers in your position would have identified themselves immediately, pulled rank, made an example of him. That wouldn't have solved the underlying problem, sir. It would have just made him more careful about who he pushes around next time. A slight smile crossed Hayes's face. You're thinking long-term. Good. That's what we need here. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the base. Your official introduction is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 0800 hours. Full assembly in the main training yard. Until then, you're still just another Marine on base. Sarah stood as well. Understood, sir. Sarah, one more thing. Hayes turned to face her. I know you've served under difficult circumstances. I know you've had to prove yourself over and over again in ways that male officers never have to. I want you to know that you have my complete support here. Whatever changes you need to make, whatever resistance you face, I've got your back. The words meant more than Hayes probably realized. Sarah had served under commanders who paid lip service to equality, but did nothing when it mattered. She had learned to trust actions, not words. But there was something genuine in Hayes's tone. I appreciate that, sir, Sarah said. I won't let you down. As Sarah left the headquarters building, the sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean in the distance. Camp Pendleton stretched out before her, thousands of acres of training grounds, barracks, and facilities. Somewhere out there, Kruger was probably having dinner with his friends, laughing about the woman he had pushed in the mess hall that morning. He had no idea that his world was about to change. Sarah walked back to her temporary quarters, a small but comfortable room in the officers' housing. She had one more night of anonymity, one more night to see how things really worked when no one knew who she was. And tomorrow, everyone would learn the truth. Part 3. The Morning Assembly. Sarah woke at 500 hours, as she had every morning for the past 20 years. She went for a run along the base perimeter, 6 miles in the pre-dawn darkness. When she returned, she showered, dressed in her full uniform, this time with every ribbon, medal, and insignia perfectly placed, and stood before the mirror. The woman looking back at her had earned every decoration on her chest: the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the Navy Commendation Medal with Valor device. Each one represented a moment of courage, sacrifice, or leadership. But the one that mattered most today was the simple silver oak leaf on her collar. Lieutenant Colonel. At CO 7:45 hours, Sarah walked across the base toward the main training yard. She could already hear the commotion of hundreds of Marines assembling. This was the weekly formation where important announcements were made, new policies introduced, and commendations awarded. Master Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting for her near the headquarters building. Up close, Sarah could see he was older than she had first thought, probably in his late 40s with weathered features that spoke of deployments and hard years of service. Ma'am, he said, saluting crisply, it's an honor. I've heard stories about you. Sarah returned the salute. Good ones, I hope. The best, ma'am. That situation in Fallujah where you held the bridge for 16 hours with just 30 Marines, they teach that at officer candidate school now. Sarah felt a touch of pride but pushed it aside. I had good Marines with me that day, Master Sergeant. They made it possible. Rodriguez smiled. That's exactly what the stories say you'd say, ma'am. He gestured toward the training yard. Everything's ready. Colonel Hayes will introduce you after the usual business. And, ma'am, that kid from yesterday, Kruger, he's out there right now, front and center with his squad. I remember him, Sarah said quietly. They walked together toward the assembly. The training yard was a massive paved area surrounded by buildings on 3 sides and open to the ocean breeze on the 4th. Nearly 800 Marines stood in formation, organized by company and platoon. Officers stood at attention in front of their units. Sarah took her place on the platform next to Colonel Hayes and several other senior officers. From this vantage point, she could see the entire assembly. After a moment of scanning the formation, she spotted Kruger. He stood with his squad in the third row, looking bored and slightly annoyed at having to stand at attention for a morning formation. Colonel Hayes stepped to the microphone. "Good morning, Marines." "Good morning, sir," 800 voices shouted back. "At ease," Hayes commanded. The formation relaxed slightly. "We have several items of business this morning. First, I want to recognize Corporal Jennifer Martinez for her exceptional performance during last week's training exercise." Corporal Martinez, front and center. A young woman broke from the formation and marched to the platform. Sarah watched with approval as Hayes presented her with a certificate of commendation. The recognition was important, especially for female Marines on a base where Sarah suspected they often felt overlooked. Hayes continued through several more routine announcements: budget updates, schedule changes, a reminder about proper conduct during liberty hours. Sarah watched the formation carefully, reading body language, noting which Marines paid attention and which ones seemed disconnected. Finally, Hayes reached the moment everyone had been waiting for. "Marines, as you know, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison retired last month after 30 years of distinguished service. We've been operating without a training division commander while we searched for the right person to take his place. Today, I'm proud to introduce that person." Every eye in the formation focused on the platform. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen comes to us with 20 years of service, including combat deployments in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other theaters of operation I'm not at liberty to discuss. She has been awarded the Bronze Star with Valor Device, the Purple Heart, and numerous other commendations for her leadership under fire. More importantly, every Marine who has ever served under her command speaks of her with the deepest respect. Sarah saw several Marines in the formation straightening up, paying closer attention. But Kruger's section seemed distracted, whispering among themselves. Hayes turned toward Sarah. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen, please address your Marines." Sarah stepped to the microphone. 800 pairs of eyes fixed on her. She took a moment, letting the silence build, making sure she had everyone's attention. "Good morning, Marines," she said. Her voice carried clearly across the yard, amplified by the speakers, but also by the natural projection she had developed over years of leading troops in combat. "Good morning, ma'am." The response was automatic, drilled into every Marine from boot camp. "I'm honored to be here at Camp Pendleton," Sarah continued. "I know that many of you are wondering what kind of commander I'll be. Will I be tough? Will I be fair? Will I understand what you're dealing with every day?" She paused, scanning the formation. Her eyes landed on Kruger. He was staring at her now, and she could see the exact moment recognition hit him. His face went pale. His posture stiffened. One of his buddies next to him whispered something, probably asking what was wrong. "Let me tell you what I believe," Sarah said, addressing the entire formation but speaking loud enough that every word was clear. "I believe that every Marine, regardless of rank, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. I believe that leadership means serving those under your command, not lording power over them. I believe that the measure of a unit is not how well it performs when everyone is watching, but how people treat each other when they think no one is paying attention." Several Marines shifted uncomfortably. Sarah knew her words were hitting home. "Yesterday morning, I arrived at this base," Sarah continued. "I kept my rank insignia off because I wanted to see how things really operate here. I wanted to see how Marines treat each other in everyday situations. What I saw troubled me." The silence in the formation was now absolute. Even the officers on the platform looked surprised. This was not the typical introductory speech. "I was in the mess hall at 06:30 hours, Sarah said. "I was standing in the breakfast line when a young Marine decided that I wasn't moving fast enough for his liking. Instead of politely asking me to speed up or simply waiting patiently, he put his hands on me and shoved me forward. My tray fell to the floor, and he laughed about it with his friends." Kruger looked like he wanted to disappear into the pavement. His face had gone from pale to bright red. The Marines around him were staring at him, putting the pieces together. Sarah's voice remained calm, almost gentle, but every word carried weight. Now, that young Marine had no idea who I was. He saw someone he perceived as weak, someone he could push around without consequences. And that tells me something important about the culture on this base. It tells me that some Marines have learned they can get away with that kind of behavior. Part 4. The Reckoning. Sarah let her words sink in for a moment. The silence in the training yard was so complete that she could hear the distant sound of ocean waves breaking on the beach beyond the base. Private First Class Kruger, Sarah said calmly. Front and center. It wasn't a request. It was an order. For a moment, Kruger didn't move. He stood frozen in his position, his face now completely drained of color. One of his squad leaders, a corporal, barked at him. "Move, Marine! The commander called you!" Kruger broke from formation and marched toward the platform. His steps were mechanical, his arms swinging in perfect rhythm, but Sarah could see the terror in his eyes. He stopped at the base of the platform and saluted. "Private First Class Kruger, reporting as ordered, ma'am." Sarah returned the salute and then stepped down from the platform to stand directly in front of him. She was a full head shorter than Kruger, but at that moment she seemed to tower over him. "At ease, Kruger," Sarah said quietly. The microphone didn't pick up her words, but she knew the front rows could hear. "Look at me." Kruger raised his eyes to meet hers. She saw fear there, but also something else. Shame. He knew what was coming. "Yesterday, you put your hands on me and shoved me in the mess hall," Sarah said, her voice still quiet but firm. "You did it because you thought you could. You thought I was someone powerless, someone who couldn't fight back. Tell me, Kruger, what did you think when you pushed me?" Kruger's jaw worked, but no words came out. "I asked you a question, Marine," Sarah said. I thought you were just another transfer, ma'am," Kruger finally managed. "I thought you were—" "I don't know what I thought, ma'am. I was wrong. Yes, you were wrong. But not just about who I am. You were wrong about how you treat people, any people. Because here's what you need to understand, Kruger. Rank should not be the only thing that makes you treat someone with respect. Human decency should be enough." Sarah turned back toward the microphone, raising her voice so the entire formation could hear. "I'm not going to punish Private Kruger beyond what he's experiencing right now. He's young. He made a mistake. And I believe Marines deserve the chance to learn from their mistakes." She could see the relief washing over Kruger's face, but Sarah wasn't finished. "However," she continued, "this incident highlights a larger problem on this base. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, please step forward." Rodriguez marched from his position and stood at attention next to Sarah. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez has been on this base for 3 years, Sarah said. In that time, he's witnessed and reported multiple instances of inappropriate behavior, hazing, harassment, Marines being disrespected because of their gender, their background, or simply because someone with more time in service decided they could get away with it. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, how many of these reports resulted in meaningful action?" Rodriguez's voice was clear and strong. "Very few, ma'am. Most were dismissed as personality conflicts or chalked up to Marines needing to toughen up. That ends today," Sarah declared. Her voice rang across the training yard with absolute authority. "Effective immediately, this base will operate under a zero-tolerance policy for harassment, hazing, and unprofessional conduct. That doesn't mean Marines can't be tough. It doesn't mean we're going to coddle anyone. It means we're going to treat each other the way Marines should treat each other, with honor, respect, and dignity." She paused, making eye contact with different sections of the formation. "Some of you are thinking right now that this is political correctness run amok, that I'm some kind of soft leader who's going to ruin the warrior culture of the Marine Corps. Let me be very clear about something." Sarah's voice hardened. "I've served in combat zones where making one mistake meant people died. I've led Marines through situations where we were outnumbered and outgunned. I've been wounded in action defending this country. Do not mistake compassion for weakness. Do not mistake respect for softness. The strongest units I've ever served in were the ones where Marines had each other's backs, where everyone from the lowest private to the highest officer understood that we're all on the same team. A murmur of approval rippled through parts of the formation. Sarah saw several senior NCOs nodding. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah continued. Over the next 30 days, I'm going to be talking to each of you, officers, NCOs, enlisted Marines. I want to hear your concerns. I want to know what's working and what's not. I want to understand the real challenges you face every day. She turned to Kruger, who was still standing at attention, looking miserable. Private Kruger, you're going to help me with this. Kruger's eyes widened. Ma'am, for the next 30 days, you're going to spend 4 hours each day working with Master Sergeant Rodriguez on a special project. You're going to interview every female Marine on this base. You're going to ask them about their experiences, the challenges they face, and the ways we can improve. You're going to compile those interviews into a report, and then you're going to present that report to me and the senior staff. Yes, ma'am, Kruger said, though he looked uncertain. You're probably wondering why I'm giving you this assignment instead of just throwing you in the brig, Sarah said. It's because I believe in redemption. I believe people can change. You made a mistake yesterday, but that doesn't have to define who you are as a Marine. What defines you is what you do next. For the first time since being called forward, Kruger's posture relaxed slightly. I won't let you down, ma'am. See that you don't, Sarah replied. She turned back to the formation. Dismissed. Company commanders, please remain behind for a briefing. The formation broke apart, with the organized chaos typical of 800 Marines being released at once. But as they dispersed, Sarah noticed something. Small groups were forming, Marines talking animatedly. Some were looking back at the platform with what appeared to be approval. Others looked skeptical or concerned. The company commanders assembled on the platform, 5 captains, each responsible for Lee,